Thank you all for being here today. Today I am joined by Mayor Steve Allender, also by the Pennington County Commission Chair Deb Hadcock, and the Pennington County Sheriff Kevin Noem. My Chief Financial Officer, Liza Clark, is with me as well today, and she'll be available to answer any detailed questions that you might have regarding the announcement that we're going to be making. As you all know, the state received $1.25 billion as a result of the CARES Act, which passed through Congress. That is dollars allocated to us to utilize for recovery of the COVID-19 and the impact that it's had on our state here in South Dakota. We are here today to announce that $200 million of that is going to be available to help cities and counties fill in costs that they may have incurred because of the virus. First, all of those allocations are posted on covid.sd.gov. So you can go there to see how much each entity is eligible for. And all of those dollars are allocated according to the U.S. Census. The decision on how much dollars in revenue would be available to each entity was not made by the state. It was made according to guidance that was put out by the Federal Treasury Department. I'm here in Rapid City today because I'm pleased to announce that the city of Rapid City will be eligible for $17.5 million, and that Pennington County will be eligible for $7.5 million. What that means is that is the amount that they are eligible for. The city and the county will have to submit reimbursement requests into us in order to get a resource amount up to that level of response. Again, all of that information and the process is on covid.sd.gov. And again, the link for those cities and county officials to submit those reimbursement requests is available on that website as well. That will be very helpful for them to get the guidance that is put out by Treasury, and also how the state will make sure that those resources are allocated in the future days. Now, we can follow the federal guidance on making sure these resources are available for cities, for counties, but we do anticipate there will be additional resources coming forward for small businesses and other entities, but that will be new programs that we will require the input of the legislature in coming days. So that's not a part of the announcement today. That will be coming in the future, but there will be additional help for those small businesses that were dramatically impacted by the virus here in South Dakota. All of those reimbursement requests will be reviewed to ensure that they meet the state and the federal guidelines. Now, as you know, yesterday we were in Sioux Falls making an announcement there. Tomorrow I will be in Aberdeen and in Huron talking about these resources going forward and making sure that the dollars get out to help individuals and to help these entities with their budgets in the coming days as soon as possible. With that, we will open it up for any questions that you might have. And again, Liza's here for any specific questions, and the mayor is available as well as the commission chair and the sheriff.
This is Morgan from the Journal.
Yep.
What would be some of the expenses and things that would counties and cities need to use this for? Can you give like some examples?
Sure, I'll let the mayor speak in just a minute, but it is specifically related to COVID-19 response, so costs they may have had to put up individuals who tested positive or quarantined. The city may have incurred some costs when it comes to supplies, personal protective equipment. It also will help cover public safety costs, so law enforcement, other costs that the public safety departments may have had. So that could be in relation to the police department, but also when it comes to the county level, it could impact the county and the sheriff's budgets as well. So I'll let the mayor speak a little bit about specifically what this means for Rapid City.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you everyone for being here. I'd like to say a big thank you to Governor Noem for coming to Rapid City today and making this announcement. We enjoy having her here. The news couldn't come at a better time when we're near the time when we're going to transition our emergency shelter that we stood up. We have previously unbudgeted money allocated to keep that shelter running between the city and county. So those are the obvious expenses, that out-of-pocket money, as the governor mentioned. Also, the law enforcement and EMS have been their service has really been dominated by COVID and the effects of it, not only the illness, but also the I think some of the behavior from being cooped up and the stress that a community feels in a time like this. We're all learning what it means to be in a global pandemic, and a pandemic here in the United States. So we're seeing that stress and that type of related activity has really strained those first responders as well. So we'll be glad to apply for reimbursement through the governor's office for the federal funding, and I would stand for any other questions you might have.
I would like to have Liza give a little bit of details, because she is in charge of the Bureau of Finance and Management, has been working closely with Treasury to get some of the flexibility that we need to utilize these funds here in South Dakota. So if Liza Clark could speak for just a moment, that'd be great.
As the governor said, Liza Clark with the Bureau of Finance and Management. To your question on specific costs that can be covered, there is a federal guidance, and then there's a federal FAQ. And then we have created a state FAQ, which is drilled down to some of the conversations we've had with Treasury and some of the interpretations we've taken on how the federal guidance can be applied. And there are a lot of specific listed in that state FAQ, and that is on the same website that cities and counties have access to. We've already received several questions from city administrators, mayors, sheriff's offices before the announcement, when the governor announced a month ago that they should start tracking expenditures. And then even since the announcement yesterday, we've had a lot of questions. And as we continue to get questions, we'll continue to add to that FAQ so that other cities and counties can share in that information.
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Darla Drew, Rapid City Council. Is there any plan for a statewide task force for recovery of the COVID, or city task force for COVID recovery?
Well, we have been having phone calls with individuals in communities that have been leading the response. So our Department of Health has worked extensively with local leaders, with mayors, county commissioners, and folks on the ground to respond. To set up a formal task force at this point is not something that we have done, although we're considering to look at what the future holds for us. And I will be very clear with folks that we are not done with the virus. It is still here in South Dakota, and I anticipate that in the coming days we could see decreases in active cases, but we also could see increases, and that is something that we need to be prepared for. So this allocation of $200 million that's going out to cities and counties is the first step, so that we can get some dollars in their pockets and make sure that they can maintain services to the public, but that there will be more programs in the coming days that the legislature will be a part of to make sure that we are responding to the people of South Dakota and getting them the help that they need. And the legislators have been fantastic at giving us feedback from their districts across the state as well as to what might be needed for insight and wisdom in the coming days.
Governor, is there hope at this point? Is there any hope at this point for money to come forward to replace lost revenue?
I'm still hoping for some flexibility in federal guidance. It's the Treasury Department that would give us the ability to do that. And also Congress could add it to another bill that might be passed. So we've been talking to our senators and to Congressman Johnson about putting language in the next stimulus bill that they may pass to give us the ability to replace revenue loss, not just for the state, but for cities and for counties as well. It's going to be dramatically more impactful at the state and at the city level because of sales tax revenues that have been impacted. And we've already seen that, but I do think that for the next year or 2 years, we could continue to see businesses struggle because of what has happened with the virus in these last several months. So that is still something I'm asking for, but we haven't received any relief on yet.
Can you talk about why 200 million, and is this kind of what the state feels like they can do with the 1.25 billion?
Sure. We went out to all of the cities and counties and looked at what their potential costs were in the last several months, talked to them about what kind of response they had to put on the ground, what kind of law enforcement or public safety measures they had to incorporate, what they spent on PPE, delivering that to folks, putting people up in shelters, and then started with a number that we knew would be higher than what those costs were and make sure that we could allocate it out as needed. So this will be the first step. There's more revenue here, but I always remind people too that it is the state of South Dakota that we'll be audited on how these dollars are spent, and so that's why we're making sure we're doing it responsibly, and that there's an accountability measure built into it to make sure that we're following the guidance and the statute that was passed at the federal level to use it in a manner for which it was intended.
My follow-up was going to be, Mayor, do you feel like the city has had 17.5 million in expenses at this time?
Well, having just received the notification yesterday, we haven't really had an opportunity to put pencil to paper, but I would say yes, especially given how the first responders' time and efforts and their budgets have been dominated by COVID and COVID-related issues. So, and the year's not over. So we're halfway through the year. Who knows, we're probably halfway through the pandemic, and so I anticipate much more.
Sure.
Well, good morning again, Governor. Thank you for taking the time to come out and make this presentation, and we appreciate the support from the state on it. Law enforcement, like many in the healthcare business, are on the front line with the COVID-19 crisis, and for that matter, all first responders are. And so we've dealt with COVID-19 directly in our facilities at the jail, at the care campus, both with clients and inmates that have had it, and staff that have had it as well, and working with people in the community. So it's a direct impact on the county. We've spent a lot of dollars on the personal protective equipment, the PPE, so it'll be helpful to recover some of those costs. And so we look forward to working with the governor's office over the next few months as we try and recover those costs for the county, and it'll be helpful for the county's budget as a whole, which again makes it easier for the community, so that burden isn't passed on to the taxpayer. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Governor Noem on her leadership of COVID-19 from the beginning. She's been in contact with our counties since the beginning of COVID-19. We really appreciate everything she's done for us. We also like to think the $7.5 million that would be coming to our county will be well used. Sheriff Noem is right. We have a lot of areas on the care campus. We do a lot of humanitarian areas for Pennington County. We do have the jail, we have the care campus, we have a lot of facilities in the county, the treasurers, the auditors, that with the elections and things that we had to change this year, the money will be well used by Pennington County. But again, thank the governor for everything and her leadership that she has done for Pennington County and our cities in Pennington County. We've been working with many of the cities in Pennington County during this whole time, and that money be well used by those cities as well. So thank you.
Further questions?
Can you tell us anything more about the business relief you mentioned? Would that be an opportunity to spend our dollars to replenish your loan fund or something, or what is the thought there?
Well, we're hoping it'll be a small business program that will come in and not only help them with some of the revenue losses that they've seen in recent months because of the economic downturn, but that it would be flexible enough that we could build in an opportunity for them to be innovative and to be more successful into the future. So that would be a new program that we'd have to develop, so we would have to get the legislators to give some input as well. And I do anticipate we could have a special session coming up in the next several months that they will want to weigh in on as well.
That would come from the existing fund?
From the $1.25 billion. And again, I'll just remind everybody that the state directly received $1.25 billion to utilize for COVID-19 response, but there also was many other dollars that came into the state in other areas. For instance, our tribes directly received funds from the federal government for COVID-19. Education received funds directly. The K-12 system and higher education all got funds that never came through the state of South Dakota, went right to those entities. So there's several other areas that federal resources came in that the state doesn't have anything to do with, but this $1.25 billion is what came to us that we are responsible to allocate appropriately.
Would you imagine that being more loans or grants, or what's that?
You know, we're talking about it, but I think there's some specific requirements that it incorporate grants. I'll let Liza speak to what she's seen for federal guidance so far, but I think grants is one of the options that needs to be considered.
Yeah, so the $1.25 billion has to be spent by December 30th. So that's why a grant program would make the most sense, as the funds have to be out the door by December 30th, 2020.
I have a follow-up from yesterday as well.
Sure.
Leslie, you'd mentioned that some of the dollars could be used for law enforcement salaries.
Mhm.
I was wondering what would like qualify that? Would these be like law enforcement that came in for extra duties or regular shifts, or how does that come up?
Sure. So at the end of May, the Treasury came out with additional guidance that said public safety and public health salaries would be deemed COVID related. And so what we've been doing, and that is on the South Dakota FAQ that we put out, number 7 and 8, I believe, and 7 defines how that law enforcement, so the sheriff, the deputies, the police force, but then in the correctional officers, the jails, those would only be if they're dealing with COVID-19 patients or inmates. But as a law enforcement, police, sheriffs, those would be deemed, their personnel expenses would be deemed eligible.
Governor, I have a question.
Sure.
So for arts and cultural organizations, I understand that there's grants that they can apply for, and the deadline would be coming up on the 6th. So what's available to them, and what can they use that for as well?
I would say what's available to them is what was previously announced. There's no anticipated reductions to those grants that they would be eligible for, and that they could continue to submit those requests and they'll come out on time. Further questions?
Would any of those dollars have to go to like a mass testing event? Like, I know the Oyate Health Center here wants to do like a lot more mass testing for their patients. Is that something that could be covered by city and county money?
Yeah, it absolutely could be. If there was testing costs that the city and the county incurred, then absolutely that would be an eligible reimbursement expense. And some of the state costs as well have been covered by that revenue that's come into the state. And different entities, the tribes have reserved funds as well that they could utilize for mass testing in the future, but we also will be partnering with them to make sure that there's testing in those areas.
And then back to Lee's question, have we had any like inmates who've had COVID in this area that we have to like, I don't know, reimburse law enforcement for their handling of that?
I'll let the sheriff talk to in his facility. We did have an isolated incidents, 1 or 2 positive cases in the Department of Corrections that was dealt with, but specific to Rapid City and Pennington County, I'll let them speak.
I didn't hear your question completely, but I understand you're asking about COVID cases in the jail. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, and we've stated that before. We've had inmates that have tested positive COVID-19, and also at the clients we serve at the care campus.
Has there been like an outbreak there, like a large number of inmates?
It's been very limited. I don't have numbers off the top of my head, but just a handful.
Something that would like go towards the money would have to come in for that. Like, I guess what expenses would need to be reimbursed for that?
Sure. Well, just the staffing alone is a big expense. Probably the biggest expense in all this is the staffing. Just generally on our budget, that's the biggest expense we have anyway. And so the staffing to cover that, and then the additional testing we've done, the PPE that we've purchased, and just all the precautions we're taking to make sure we mitigate any spread in our facilities. Thank you.
Further questions? Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Just kind of to change the subject a little bit.
Sure.
It hasn't been since about June 4th since we've had some significant rain out here. Are there any concerns for the July 3rd event coming up for fireworks?
Yes, absolutely. We're hoping for rain in the coming days, but also recognizing that we have long established a go, no-go plan for the fireworks at Mount Rushmore. And that's a plan that is in place, agreed to by the National Park Service with the Department of Interior through the environmental review processes that we've been conducting for the last year and a half. So that's not a decision that I would make or the state would make. It would be a decision that this group of folks that have been working on this project and safety and environmental concerns for the last year and a half. So that day of the fireworks is when that decision would be made by all those people.
Can you talk about
can't specifically because a lot of it is laid out in environmental review processes that happen within the Department of Interior and the National Park Service with their knowledge of the situations on which it would be a go or where it wouldn't be a go. And also the National Weather Service is a part of that as well. Further questions? Okay, thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.